Hi guys. Firstly, I want to say a massive thank you to everyone who wished me well last week. It is rare I get so sick that I don't have the energy to even get out of bed, let alone try and work and put a video together. I'm not 100% yet, but I'm getting there, and hopefully by the time this video goes up, I should be back on the rails soon. This is the video I planned for last week, and I took all of these pictures the week before. So once again, I'm throwing you all a bit of a curveball video, and I decided to take you all on a visit to York. In particular, York Cemetery, to look at and talk about some well-known and not so well-known people associated with the railways around here, with a little bit of an added bonus too. Now, before I go on, I must say thanks in full to the York Cemetery and the friends of York Cemetery for making this video possible, and credit does belong to them. It is them that have done the principal research on the graves that I visited, and all the graves can be found on the various self-guided walks on their website. Through their research, it was possible to dig a little deeper, not really what you want to say in a graveyard, into the various resting places that I'm going to talk about. So, a little bit about the cemetery. It is one of only 2 Victorian cemeteries that is still privately owned within the UK and covers 24 acres of stunning land. Considering its age, almost 190 years old, it's still in active operation and can still handle modern day burials and cremations. However, the cemetery also encourages education, recreation through guided walks, and also conservation. We've seen several older cemeteries being converted into natural habitats for insects and wildlife. The old graves offer safe haven to several animals and plant species. The grass in certain areas is purposely left overgrown to offer cover, and wildflowers are encouraged to grow. It's a place of tranquil haven in a very busy city. The cemetery also is a great place to learn about local history, family genealogy, and famous faces. I was originally planning to film just the graves and the walk around while I talk. However, when I got there, I was surprised just how busy the cemetery was, and I made a decision there and then not to film the area out of respect for the families that were there. The last thing I want is a portrayal of disrespect, but I do feel these stories need to be told, with many giving lessons, even for today. The first grave on this list is one that many would have heard of, especially if you visit York. William Milner. It was April 1942. 42-year-old William Milner was a station foreman, and he was very dutiful in his work. In the midst of the war, he must have been acutely aware of just how important the railway was in keeping the movement of goods and soldiers flowing. The problem is, the enemy knew this too. In the early hours of the 29th of April, the German Air Force rained down on York. Its target was not just military, it was anything to demoralise the populace into giving up. This included its famous minster and several key preserved sites in the city. York Station, being as large and important as it was a perfect target. It was hit several times over, one bomb hitting a waiting passenger train and another hitting the north shed and exploding alongside the stabled A4 Sir Ralph Wedgwood and its stablemate, destroying them both. William was relatively uninjured by the blast, but he knew that many people were not so lucky. He needed to get the first aid kit to help them, but the building where it was burning and unstable. Forsaking his own life, William went in to retrieve it, but at that moment the building collapsed. He was found the next morning in the rubble, still holding the kit. He was awarded the King's Commendation for Gallantry, and his plaque sits proud in York Station. The next grave is a lasting reminder of why it's so important not to get too complacent when working on the line. Harry was employed as a labourer working at the Steel and Iron Company works in West Hartlepool. He was recently widowed, but he still worked hard in his role. On the 3rd of September 1946, he was working outside in the railway sidings. Not much is known on how it happened, whether he tripped or that the engine hit him, What is known is that he fell into the path of an engine. He survived the initial impact, however he passed when he was taken to hospital. The coroner put his death down to a tragic accident and blamed complacency as the cause. Even today, it's easy to get complacent with railways, but sadly it's how the worst accidents occur. Robert was another victim to the Baedeker bombing. He was a police constable working on the railway. While his work was enjoyable, his family life was nothing short of tragic. He had 3 children. He lost one as an infant, his eldest at 19, and his final child was born blind. Robert was working for the LNER as a police constable and was based at York Station when the air raid siren sounded. A sleeper express passenger train bound for Edinburgh was in the station and was running late, but the sirens prompted the 800 or so passengers to evacuate onto the platforms. Before they left the station, the first bombs hit. Robert, who was working in the post room, had no time to react, and he was killed as he worked. His only surviving daughter, despite the loss of her sight, lived on and passed at the age of 76. Alfred's passing was a bit of a mystery. Not in how he passed, that's obvious. It was why he did what he did. So Alfred was a local lad, and like many local lads in the golden times of steam, he dreamt of working on the engines. He got a job as a cleaner for the Yorkshire and Lancashire Railway, and he worked up the ranks to fireman. He was young, only 27, but he would have been excited to work up to that elite role of driver. On the 27th of November 1909, he was travelling from Manchester to York. It was a standard run with the usual trains and nothing was out of the ordinary. The driver stopped the train at Sowerby Bridge Station as one of the engine lamps had got out. As the use of head codes was absolute and as they were travelling at night, the lamp had to be fixed before passing through into the next section. Alfred offered to attend to the light, and anyone who had undertaken track safety tests knows it's always best to use safe routes when working around engines. Now this fact would not have been lost on Alfred, but instead of taking the notably safe route of the station platform, Alfred chose to alight to the 6 foot and onto the tracks. The train coming from the opposite direction simply couldn't stop in time. The accident was wholly avoidable, and no one knows why Alfred didn't take the safer and frankly easier route. A few metres from Alfred's grave sits the final resting place of Florence Umpleby, and the only lady on this list. Florence was a teacher, and a beloved one at that, at the local school, and her sister worked at the Roundtree factory. Luckily, both factory and school holidays tended to coincide with each other, and both would take holidays together. One day the sisters decided to take a holiday to Scotland and take the train. On the 28th of July, the train was sitting at Haymarket Station. Florence was sitting in the third to last carriage, and the train waited patiently in the station for a few last-minute passengers. Unfortunately, it was a costly delay, as the Waverley to Kirkliston train slammed into the back of it. The Waverley train was coming into the station, but had misread a signal from the driver, and the signalman not lowering the home signal stopping the train caused the train to pass at danger. It wasn't a big shunt, in fact 10 miles an hour, but it was enough for the second coach from the rear to jump the track and mount the coach Florence was in, crushing the wooden carriage to timber. Florence and 4 others would perish, with scores injured. Florence's sister survived with injuries. Luke's story serves as a reminder of why trespassing on the tracks can lead to disaster, even if you work on them. Luke was a signalman on the East Coast Main Line short of Doncaster. He was married with a young family. Luke was not scheduled to work on the 29th of July 1894 and had spent the day watching and taking part in cricket. He stayed late and was seen talking to the onboard signaller around 10:30 as night was settling in. Luke headed home shortly after, but the quickest way to his house was the tracks. He was found later that night by a passing train. He had been run over with terrible, and had he survived, life-changing injuries. He passed the following day. Frederick's case is a classic case of misadventure. He was a railway porter and had grown through the ranks to engine driver. During his many years on the line, he had learnt new skills and a few driver tricks to get the most out of their engines. Some were handy tips and tricks, while others were more bending the rules. One of the big no-nos, and definitely against the rules, was to wire the blast pipe. Drivers would place a piece of wire within the blast pipe chamber. The wire was said to help the engine run more efficiently and push more steam into the cylinders. Of course, the wire could seriously hamper the engine, but it was useful for heavy loads. Frederick knew it was against regulation to wire the blast pipe, so when he stopped the engine, he made his way along the running board to the smoke box to get the wire out. As he closed the smoke box door after retrieving the wire, he slipped and fell from his engine. He hit his head on the rail and never regained consciousness. There isn't much of Frederick's grave left, and it took a while to find. There is a headstone there, but it's buried and you can just see it. Some may think it's a travesty leaving headstones like this, but as with many Victorian graves, it can cause more environmental harm lifting the stone and can cause the grave underneath to be more unstable, and there is more of a chance of the stone falling again, causing more damage, but it's an interesting grave anyway. The last grave in the yard we're visiting is one I've searched for a while now. I'm surprised there's no pictures of it online. I was also surprised that such an influential man had such an unassuming grave. It's George Leman. George needs no introduction on my channel. 3 times Mayor of York, MP for York, the overseer of the preservation of the city walls, and the main rival to the Railway King himself. George led a full and fulfilling life as the chairman of several railways, including the NER. He was immortalised in a statue that watches over the station and his road namesake. If you want to check out more, then please check out my video of him on the link below. I was quite surprised to see how inaccessible his grave also was for a man of his stature. Even by Victorian standards, this is the closest I could get to it. Now, the upkeep of the cemetery is fantastic, but Victorian graves are old and prone to collapse. Some are sunken in, while some, like Fred's grave, are buried completely. George has no big monument, and the words on his grave can barely be read, but he is buried surrounded by his people, and I'm sure that's the way he would have wanted it. I also took the time to walk around the graves in general, and I was surprised at just how much variety and interesting features there were. And yeah, some were personalised, some had beautiful designs, and some just even gave me a little chuckle. I love the little touches the graves had, and with some helping to connect with the people that they immortalised. So this one's not railway related, but you can't visit York's most famous graves without a visit to its most notorious. Dick Turpin was a real scoundrel, and what you would expect when you hear highwayman. He was one of the most famous highway robbers of modern times and would strike in the forests around the UK, taking belongings from unsuspecting travellers. He worked a lot down south, however he found himself back in Yorkshire under the alias John Palmer. Although his misdeeds were too numerous to mention, he was caught and convicted on the charge of horsnapping. Horsnapping was a capital punishment offence, and he was tried and convicted in York. He was taken along with another thief to Naesmere, where he was hung in a public execution. There is some contention about his grave's whereabouts, but many have concluded that he's either there or lying very close nearby. So yeah, once again a very different video. I have included a few highlights of York today, and yes, I admit I did go get a ghost. I had a great time and I can't wait to visit again. All I can say really is have a good one. I hope your weekend is awesome, and I'll see you next week with more railway related content.